You're in your 60s with $500,000 to $800,000 saved. You've done everything right. And there's one decision you're making right now that will cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over your retirement. It's not a bad stock pick. It's not market timing. It's how much cash you're holding. Most retirees hold 25-30% of their portfolio in cash for safety. If you're one of them, that safe money is destroying you. It's costing you $10,000 to $15,000 per year in lost wealth. Over 20 years, that's $300,000 to $400,000 gone. Here's what nobody told you. The conservative approach that feels right, holding cash, avoiding volatility, playing it safe, is the fastest way to run out of money at 78. And by then, it's too late to fix. I'm going to show you exactly why cash after 60 is a trap, what the math actually says about inflation and purchasing power, and what you should be doing instead. This isn't theory. This is the difference between comfortable retirement and desperate phone calls to your kids at 75. Before we get into this, do me a favor, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching this from. I want to know who's here. City, state, country, just let me know you're watching. This is where people in their 60s with decent portfolios make their most expensive mistake. They think safety means cash. They think preservation means low risk. They think avoiding losses means avoiding the market. They're wrong on every count. And this mistake costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars they'll never recover. Here's what actually happens. You retire at 62 with $700,000. You're scared of another 2008-style crash, so you hold $150,000 in cash, about 21% of your portfolio. It feels smart. It feels safe. Everyone at your retirement party nods approvingly when you mention your cash cushion. 5 years later, you're 67. That $150,000 is still $150,000 in nominal terms, but inflation averaged 3% annually. In real purchasing power, your $150,000 can now buy what $129,000 bought 5 years ago. You lost $21,000 in purchasing power by doing nothing, just by holding cash. But here's what kills people. If you'd invested that $150,000 in a balanced portfolio, earning 6% annually instead of holding cash, earning maybe 1%, you'd have about $201,000 after 5 years. The difference? $72,000. That's what playing it safe with cash cost you in just 5 years. But Charlie, you're thinking, what if the market crashed? I'd have lost money. Let me show you why that thinking is backward. In 2008, the S&P 500 dropped 37%. If your $150,000 had been invested and dropped 37%, you'd have not out for $500. Brutal, painful, but then the market recovered. By 2013, just 5 years later, that $500 would have grown back to about $185,000. You'd still be ahead of the cash holder. And that's assuming you invested everything at the absolute peak before the crash and did nothing. In reality, if you were dollar cost averaging or rebalancing, you'd have done even better. But even in the worst case scenario, being invested beat holding cash over any reasonable time frame. This is what people don't understand. At 60 plus, you're not protecting against market crashes by holding cash. You're guaranteeing losses to inflation. You're choosing certain slow death over possible temporary setbacks. And that's not safety. That's fear masquerading as prudence. Let me show you what this looks like over a full retirement. You're 62 with $700,000 total. You hold $150,000 in cash, 21%, and $550,000 invested, 79%. Over 25 years until age 87, your $50,000 invested at 7% annually becomes about $2.99 million. Your $150,000 cash at 1% interest becomes about $192,000. Total, $318 million at 87. But what if you'd only held $50,000 emergency cash and invested the other $100,000? $650,000 invested at 7% becomes about $3.53 million. $50,000 cash at 1% becomes $64,000. Total, $3.59 million at 87. That's a $410,000 difference over your retirement. Same person, same market returns, just different cash allocation. And $410,000 is the difference between comfortable retirement and constrained retirement, between helping grandkids with college and not being able to, between taking that anniversary trip and staying home to save money. But here's the part that should terrify you. Most people holding 20-30% cash in their 60s don't even realize they're making this mistake. They think they're being responsible, conservative, smart. They're actually being reckless with their future purchasing power. You see, there are different kinds of risk. Market risk, the risk of temporary portfolio declines, gets all the attention. It's scary, visible, and makes headlines. But inflation risk, the guaranteed erosion of purchasing power, is invisible, boring, and deadly. And after 60, inflation risk is far more dangerous than market risk for most people. Here's what changed that nobody explained to you. You're not accumulating anymore. You're distributing. And distribution requires completely different thinking about cash than accumulation did. When you were 45, holding 6 months of expenses in cash made sense. You had job security to think about, mortgages to pay, emergencies that couldn't wait. Cash was appropriate because you had decades for the rest to grow. At 65, you don't have decades. You have maybe 20-25 years, and every dollar sitting in cash is a dollar that can't grow to fight inflation over those 20-25 years. The rules changed, but most people kept playing by the old rules. Let me show you the mathematical reality of retirement that makes cash so dangerous. You need your portfolio to do 3 things simultaneously: generate income for living expenses, grow enough to offset inflation. Last 25-30 years, cash does exactly one of these: generate income. Barely. It fails completely at fighting inflation and lasting long-term. So when you're holding 20-30% cash, you're essentially telling 20-30% of your portfolio, "Don't help me with 2 of the 3 things I desperately need." Here's the specific math that changes everything. Let's say you need $50,000 per year to live on, plus Social Security. With $700,000 portfolio, that's about a 7% withdrawal rate. Too high, unsustainable. But if you hold $150,000 in cash and it's not growing, your real working portfolio is only $550,000. Now you need to generate $50,000 from $550,000. That's a 9% withdrawal rate from your invested portion. Do you see the trap? By playing it safe with excess cash, you're actually forcing your invested portion to work harder, take more risk, generate higher returns just to compensate for the dead weight of cash. You made your situation more risky, not less, by holding too much cash. This is the paradox that destroys retirements. The safer you try to play with excess cash, the more aggressive your invested portion needs to be to make up for it. You end up with a portfolio that's simultaneously too conservative, can't beat inflation, and too aggressive, needs high returns to compensate. Worst of both worlds. Let me give you a real example from someone I knew. Man retired at 63 with $800,000, held $200,000 in cash, $600,000 invested, needed $48,000 annually for expenses. His logic: I have 4 years of expenses in cash, so I'm safe. 4 years later, he'd spent $192,000 of his cash, 4 years x $48,000. His portfolio grew modestly to $720,000, total $728,000 at age 67. But inflation was 3% annually, so his $48,000 need grew to $54,000, and his portfolio was actually smaller than when he started in inflation-adjusted terms. At 67, he realized the problem. His safe cash strategy had him going backward. He should have held maybe $75,000 cash, 18 months expenses, and kept the rest invested, That $125,000 difference invested at 7% would have been worth about $164,000 after 4 years. His portfolio would have been $884,000 instead of $728,000. That's $156,000 lost to safety. And here's what makes this tragic. He was only 4 years in. He had another 20-plus years to go. The hole he dug in those first 4 years with excessive cash compounded into catastrophe by age 80. Most people don't realize this until it's too late. They hold too much cash from 60, 70. Then at 70, they look at their statements and realize they're going backward. They adjust, usually too aggressively out of panic, and often make things worse. If they just held appropriate cash levels from the beginning, they'd be fine. Here's the question you should be asking: how much cash do I actually need? Not how much feels comfortable. How much does the math say I need? The answer for most people in their 60s, 12, 24 months of expenses. That's it. Not 3 years, not 5 years, not enough to feel secure. 12, 24 months. Here's why this number works. You need cash for 3 purposes. Purpose number 1, immediate liquidity for bills. You need to pay rent, buy food, handle utilities. This is 1-2 months of expenses, about $4,000 to $8,000 for most people. This sits in checking account, readily accessible. Purpose number 2, true emergency fund, medical emergency, roof replacement, car breakdown, things that can't wait. This is another 3 to 6 months of expenses, maybe $12,000, $24,000. This sits in high-yield savings, accessible within days. Purpose number 3, bear market buffer. This is the important one. You need enough cash to not sell stocks during a market crash. If markets drop 30 to 40%, you don't want to sell at the bottom to fund living expenses. So you need 6 to 12 months of expenses you can draw from while waiting for recovery. Another $24,000, $48,000. Add it all up, $40,000, $80,000 total, for someone spending $48,000 annually. That's 10, 20 months of expenses. Let's call it 12, 18 months for most people to have margin of safety on a $700,000 portfolio. That's $56,000, $72,000 in cash. Maybe 10% of the portfolio, not 20, 30%. The other $628,000, $644,000 needs to be working, growing, generating returns, fighting inflation. But here's what people actually do. They hold $150,000, $250,000 in cash because it feels right. They can't articulate why beyond vague notions of safety. They just know that seeing $150,000 in cash makes them feel secure, even though mathematically it's destroying them. This is emotion overriding logic. And emotion after 60 costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let me show you another angle on this. Every dollar over your necessary cash amount is earning maybe 1% instead of 7%. That's a 6% annual opportunity cost. On $100,000 excess cash, that's $6,000 per year you're losing. Over 20 years, that's $120,000 in simple terms, but in compound terms, it's over $240,000 you'll never have. So when someone at 62 is holding $200,000 cash instead of $75,000, that excess $125,000 is costing them about $7,500 annually in lost returns. Over a 25-year retirement, that's nearly $300,000 in lifetime wealth sacrificed for feeling safe. Now, here's the question. Does holding that extra cash actually make you safer? Or does having $300,000 less over your lifetime make you less safe? The answer is obvious once you do the math. But most people never do the math. They just hold cash and hope it works out. It doesn't work out. It never works out. Not with 3% inflation eating away at purchasing power year after year, not when you need your portfolio to last 25, 30 years, not when healthcare costs are rising faster than inflation. Excess cash is slow financial suicide for retirees. Here's what terrifies me about people holding excess cash after 60. They don't understand what 3% inflation means over 25 years. They hear 3% and think, that's small. It's not small. It's devastating. Let me show you what 3% annual inflation does to $100,000 over retirement. After 10 years, $100,000 buys what $74,000 bought originally. After 20 years, $100,000 buys what $55,000 bought originally. After 25 years, $100,000 buys what $47,000 bought originally. You lose over half your purchasing power in 25 years at just 3% inflation. Half. And if inflation runs higher, say 4%, because healthcare and food inflate faster than general CPI, you lose even more. So that $150,000 you're holding in cash for safety, in 25 years, at 3% inflation, it'll buy what $71,000 buys today. You effectively threw away $79,000 for the privilege of feeling secure. That's the cost of cash after 60. But here's what makes this worse. You're not just losing purchasing power on the cash. You're losing all the growth that money could have generated. If that $150,000 had been invested at 7% annual returns, after 25 years, you'd have about $814,000. Adjusted for 3% inflation, that's still $385,000 in today's purchasing power. Let's compare. $150,000 cash after 25 years at 1% interest, or book $192,000 nominal, $91,000 real purchasing power, $150,000 invested after 25 years at 7% returns from $814,000 nominal, $385,000 real purchasing power. The difference is $294,000 in real purchasing power. Same $150,000 starting point. One decision, cash versus invested, creates a nearly $300,000 difference in what you can actually buy 25 years later. And 25 years isn't hypothetical for someone who's 62. That's age 87. Most people retiring at 62 need their money to last until at least 87, maybe longer. So this isn't abstract theory. This is your actual retirement timeline. Now here's the cruel irony. The people holding excessive cash are usually doing it because they're worried about running out of money. They're afraid of risk. But by holding too much cash, they're guaranteeing the exact outcome they fear. They're ensuring they'll have less purchasing power in their 80s when they're most vulnerable. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. You retire at 62 with $700,000. You hold $150,000 cash, invest $550,000. You need $50,000 annually for expenses. Year 1, age 62, you're fine. Portfolio is $700,000. You spend $50,000 from cash. Year 5, age 67, you've spent $250,000 from cash and replenished some from portfolio sales. But inflation means you now need $58,000 annually, not $50,000. Your $550,000 invested portion grew to maybe $730,000, but you've been pulling from it. Real portfolio value, about $650,000 after inflation adjustment. You're going backward. Year 10, age 72. You need $67,000 annually now due to inflation. Your portfolio is around $580,000 in real terms. You're in trouble? You start cutting expenses. No travel, no helping grandkids, stress about every purchase. Year 15, age 77. You need $7,000 to $8,000 annually. Portfolio is around $480,000. You're nearly out. You might make it to 82 or 83 before running completely dry. Then what? This is the path excessive cash creates. Not because of market crashes or bad luck. Because of basic mathematics and inflation compounding against you year after year. Now let me show you the alternative. Same person, same $700,000, but only holds $75,000 cash, invests $625,000. Year 1, age 62. Portfolio is $700,000. You spend $50,000, mostly from dividends and strategic withdrawals. Year 5, age 67. Your $625,000 invested portion grew to about $877,000. Even after withdrawals for expenses and inflation-adjusted needs, you have more than you started with. Year 10, age 72. Portfolio around $920,000 in real terms. You're thriving, not just surviving. You can afford that trip to see grandkids. You can help with emergencies without stress. Year 15, age 77, portfolio around $880,000 real value. Still strong, you'll make it to 90 plus comfortably. You might even leave an inheritance. Same person, same market returns, same inflation. The only difference is the cash allocation decision made at 62. That single decision determined whether retirement was comfortable or desperate. So if cash is killing you after 60, what should you do instead? Here's the actual allocation that works for most people in their 60s and 70s. Tier 1, True Cash, 8 to 12% of portfolio. This is your $60,000 to $90,000 for someone with $750,000. It covers 1-2 months expenses and checking, $8,000 to $12,000. 3-6 months emergency fund and high-yield savings, $18,000 to $36,000. 6 to 12 months bear market buffer in treasury bills or money market, $36,000 to $72,000. Total, about $62,000 to $120,000 depending on your expense level and risk tolerance. This is legitimately safe money you can access anytime. It serves a real purpose. Tier 2, short-term bonds, 10 to 15% of portfolio. This is your $75,000 to $112,000. It goes into short-term treasury bonds, 1 3-year maturity. High-quality corporate bonds, short duration. Bond index funds with average maturity under 3 years. Purpose. This is your next layer of safety. It earns 3 to 4% instead of 1%. It's almost as liquid as cash. You can sell in days if needed, but it actually keeps pace with or beats inflation, unlike cash. This is the money you'll probably touch in years 2 to 5 of retirement. Tier 3, intermediate bonds, 15 to 20% of portfolio. This is your $112,000 to $150,000. It goes into intermediate term treasury bonds, 3 to 7-year maturity, municipal bonds. If you're in high tax bracket, diversified bond funds with 4-6-year average duration. Purpose. This provides income and some stability while earning 4-5% annually. This is money you probably won't touch for 5 to 10 years, so it can handle a bit more volatility. And the extra 1 to 2% yield over shorter bonds compounds significantly over time. Tier 4, dividend-paying stocks, 30 to 35% of portfolio. This is your $225,000 to $262,000. It goes into high-quality dividend aristocrats, companies that raise dividends for 25-plus years, dividend-focused index funds or ETFs, REITs for diversification and income. Purpose. This generates income, 3 to 4% dividend yield, while also providing growth. These stocks will fluctuate, but they're less volatile than pure growth stocks. And the dividends give you cash flow without selling shares. This is your inflation protection. Dividends tend to grow over time. Tier 5, growth-oriented stocks, 30 to 35% of portfolio. This is your $225,000 to $262,000. It goes into S&P 500 index fund total stock, market index fund, some international exposure, 20-30% of this tier. Purpose. This is your long-term growth engine. Yes, even at 65. Why? Because you probably have 25 years ahead of you. This portion doesn't need to generate income. It just needs to grow to maintain your purchasing power decades from now. This is the money that protects you at 80-85. Total allocation, 8 to 12% cash, 10 to 15% short-term bonds, 15-20% intermediate bonds, 30 to 35% dividend stocks, 30 to 35% growth stocks. That's roughly 35-45% bonds cash, 55-65% stocks. More conservative than working years, but still growth-oriented enough to beat inflation over 25 years. Now here's why this works better than 30% cash. Every tier has a purpose and a timeline. The cash and short-term bonds, 20-25% combined, handle years, month 1 to 3. The intermediate bonds and dividend stocks, 45-50% combined, handle years 4 to 10. The growth stocks, 30 to 35%, handle years 11 to 25. You're not asking any one part of the portfolio to do everything. Each tier does its job. And critically, only 8 to 12% is actually in non-growing cash. The rest is working growing, fighting inflation, generating returns. Compare this to the person holding 30% cash. They have 30% doing nothing, 70% doing everything. Their portfolio is unbalanced, inefficient, and doomed to fail over time. Now, I need to pause here and address something. Some of you are thinking, Charlie, this is all great, but what if I retire right before a crash? What if I set up this allocation and the market drops 40% in year one? Let me show you why that question, while valid, misses the bigger picture. Yes, sequence of returns risk is real. If you retire in 2008 and the market crashes immediately, that's painful. But here's what most people don't understand. Even with a crash in year one, proper allocation with only 10 to 12% cash still beats 30% cash over a 25-year retirement. Why? Because the 30% cash holder is guaranteed to lose to inflation every single year. The properly allocated investor might take a hit in year one, but has 24 more years to recover and grow. And historically, markets have always recovered within 3 to 5 years. Your cash buffer, that 10 to 12% plus short-term bonds, gives you 2 to 3 years to not sell during crashes. That's the whole point. You're not trying to avoid crashes. You're positioning yourself to survive them without locking in losses. The real danger isn't retiring before a crash. It's holding so much cash that you can't beat inflation even when markets are good. That's guaranteed failure versus possible temporary setback. Here's what makes this allocation actually work: rebalancing. And this is where people screw up even if they get the initial allocation right. You set up your portfolio, 10% cash, 35% bonds, 55% stocks. Perfect. Then a year passes. Stocks did well, up 12%. Bonds returned 3%. Now your portfolio is 8% cash, 33% bonds, 59% stocks. You've drifted from your target. What do? Most people do nothing. Stocks are doing great. Why would I sell them? So they drift further. After another good year, they're at 7% cash, 31% bonds, 62% stocks. After 5 good years, they're at 5% cash, 25% bonds, 70% stocks. Now they're more aggressive than they intended. Their cash buffer is too small. They're overexposed to stocks. Then the market crashes 35%. Their portfolio drops 25% overall because 70% x 35% are 24.5%. They panic. They had drifted into a risk profile they couldn't handle emotionally. This is how people blow up in their 60s, not through one bad decision, but through gradual drift they never corrected. Here's what you actually do: rebalance annually. Once per year, you look at your allocation. If any asset class is more than 5% away from target, you rebalance back to target. So when stocks outperformed and you're at 59% stocks instead of 55% target, you sell 4% of your portfolio from stocks and buy bonds or add to cash. You're selling high, stocks that went up, and buying low, bonds that lagged. This is mechanically enforced discipline. And here's the magic. This keeps you from getting too aggressive when stocks are expensive. You're forced to sell some, and too conservative when stocks are cheap. You're forced to buy some. It's automatic market timing without trying to predict anything. Let me show you why this matters. 2 retirees, both 65, both starting with $700,000. Person A sets 10% cash, 35% bonds, 55% stocks. Never rebalances, just lets it drift. Person B, same allocation, rebalances annually. After 20 years, Person A ended up at 4% cash, 18% bonds, 78% stocks before the 2008-style crash in year 18 of retirement. The crash devastated them. Portfolio dropped from 1.19 to 650K. They panicked, sold stocks, locked in losses, ended with 580K at 85. Person B maintained 10% cash, 35% bonds, 55% stocks through disciplined rebalancing. When the crash came in year 18, they dropped from $1 15 mailers to 780K, still painful, but not catastrophic. They didn't panic because they knew they had cash buffer and bonds. Recovery brought them to 920K by age 85. Same starting point, same market returns, $340,000 difference at 85, because one rebalanced and one didn't. This is what professional management actually does. That's valuable. Not picking stocks, not timing markets, but maintaining discipline through rebalancing when you emotionally don't want to. Here's what I need you to understand. Knowing the right allocation doesn't matter if you can't emotionally handle it. And this is where most people fail after 60. The math says 10% cash, 35% bonds, 55% stocks. But when the market drops 25% in your first year of retirement, can you actually sleep at night? Or will you panic, sell everything, move to cash, and lock in losses? Because if you can't handle the volatility, you're better off more conservative, not because it's mathematically optimal, but because you won't blow yourself up emotionally. A suboptimal allocation you can stick with beats an optimal allocation you'll abandon during crashes. This is the honest conversation nobody has. Financial advisors show you efficient frontiers and optimal allocations. But they don't tell you that optimal doesn't matter if you can't psychologically handle it. Let me tell you about someone who learned this the hard way. Retired at 64 with $850,000. Smart guy, read all the books, knew the math, set up 10% cash, 30% bonds, 60% stocks. Perfect. Year one, market drops 18%. His $850K becomes $722K. He's terrified. Didn't sleep for weeks. Called his advisor daily. Spent his first retirement year in constant anxiety. Year two, market recovers, up 22%. He's back to $865K. But the damage was done psychologically. He couldn't handle another year like that. Moved to 40% cash, 40% bonds, 20% stocks. Now he's too conservative. His portfolio can't beat inflation long term. At 78, he's struggling. His overly conservative response to one bad year cost him his retirement security. The lesson: he should have started more conservative, maybe 20% cash, 40% bonds, 40% stocks, and held it through volatility. Suboptimal, but he could handle it emotionally. He'd have more money now than his panic-driven reallocation left him with. Here's my framework for this. If you can handle seeing 25% portfolio drops without panic, 10% cash, 35% bonds, 55% stocks. If 25% drops make you anxious but you can hold, 15% cash, 40% bonds, 45% stocks. If you'll panic and sell during any significant drop, 20% cash, 50% bonds, 30% stocks. Is that third option suboptimal mathematically? Yes. Will it still work over 25 years? Probably, if you stay disciplined. Is it better than the alternative where you set aggressive allocation, panic during crashes, and destroy yourself? Absolutely. The portfolio that works is the one you'll actually hold through inevitable market declines, not the one that backtests best, not the one the calculator says is optimal, the one you can emotionally handle. But here's the key. Whatever allocation you choose, it should not be 30 to 40% cash. That's not a conservative portfolio. That's financial suicide by inches. Even the most conservative option I listed is only 20% cash, not 30-40% like so many retirees hold. Here's something most people miss. Your cash allocation strategy connects directly to when you take Social Security. And getting this connection wrong costs people 6 figures. If you retire at 62 and take Social Security immediately at 62, your benefit is about 30% lower than if you wait until full retirement age, 67 for most people. That's permanent. You get 30% less every month for the rest of your life. But people take it early because they need the income. Except they don't need it if they'd held proper cash allocation. Let me show you. You retire at 62 with $750,000. If you take Social Security at 62, you get maybe $1,800 a month. If you wait until 67, you get $12,500 a month. That's $700 a month more, or $8,400 a year. For the rest of your life, if you live to 87, 25, more years after 62, that's $210,000 in additional lifetime benefits by waiting 5 years. But people won't wait because they're afraid to spend from their portfolio. Here's where cash allocation matters. If you have proper cash bond buffer, $75,000, $100,000, you can easily bridge 5 years from 62, 67 without touching Social Security. You live off $50,000 a year from portfolio and cash for 5 years, that's $250,000 total. Then at 67, Social Security kicks in at the higher rate. Your portfolio withdrawals drop to maybe $30,000 a year instead of $50,000. Lower withdrawal rate means portfolio lasts longer and grows more. Compare two scenarios. Scenario A, take SS at 62, $750K portfolio at 62. SS benefit, $1,800 a month, $21,600 a year. Need $50K your total, so $28,400 from portfolio. By age 77, portfolio is around $620,000 after 15 years of $28,400 annual withdrawals and modest growth. Lifetime SS benefits from 62.87, $540,000. Scenario B, wait for SS until 67, $750K portfolio at 62. Take $50K a year from portfolio for 5 years, 62 67, portfolio at 67, $600,000, lower because you took $250K out. SS benefit at 67, $2,500 a month, $30,000 a year. Need $50K your total, so only $20,000 from portfolio. By age 77, portfolio is around $710,000, lower withdrawal rate allowed growth. Lifetime SS benefits from 67 to 87, $600,000. Scenario B wins by $150,000 plus in total wealth by age 77. Because a higher SS benefit, $8,400 a year extra, compounds over time and allows lower portfolio withdrawals. But people in scenario A wouldn't wait because they were holding 30% cash and were scared to spend from their portfolio. If they'd held proper 10 to 12% cash and understood the math, they'd have waited and ended up $150,000 wealthier. This is another hidden cost of excessive cash. It makes you take Social Security early because you're afraid to spend from investments. And early Social Security costs you 6 figures in lifetime benefits. What this means for you today: you're 62, 65, 68, somewhere in that range. You're holding too much cash right now. I know you are because statistics say 70% of retirees hold 25% plus in cash equivalents. And it's killing your retirement whether you realize it or not. Here's what you do this week. Step 1. Calculate your actual cash need. Monthly expenses, X attached to 12 months, Schroeder minimum cash. Add 6 months expenses for emergency buffer. Total should be 12 to 18 months expenses maximum. For most people, $50,000 to $100,000. Step 2. Look at your current cash holdings, checking accounts, savings accounts, CDs, money market funds. Add it all up. Step 3. Calculate your excess current cash minus necessary cash without excess. This excess needs to be redeployed. Step 4. Create a 90-day transition plan. Don't dump $100,000 into stocks tomorrow. That's market timing and stupid. Instead, month 1, move 33% of excess into short-term bond fund. Month 2, move 33% of excess into dividend stock fund. Month 3, move final 33% into growth stock fund. This dollar cost averages you in over 3 months, reducing timing risk. Step 5, set up automatic rebalancing. Most brokerages offer this. Set it to rebalance quarterly or annually. This keeps you from drifting too aggressive or conservative. Let me be specific with an example. You're 65 with $800,000 total. Currently, $240,000 cash, 30%, $280,000 bonds, 35%, $280,000 stocks, that's 35%. Your expenses are $60,000 a year. You need 2 months expenses, $10,000 in checking 6 months emergency, $30,000 in high-yield savings, 12 months bear market buffer, $60,000 in treasury bills. Total necessary cash, $100,000. You have $240,000 cash. Excess, $140,000. Your 90-day plan. Month 1, move $47,000 to short-term bond fund. Month 2, move $47,000 to dividend stock fund, VYM, SCHD, or similar. Month 3 out of 3, move $46,000 to S&P 500 index fund, new allocation after 90 days. Cash, $100,000, 12.5%. Bonds, $327,000, 41%. Stocks, $373,000, 46.5%. This is more conservative than the aggressive portfolio I described earlier, 10% cash, 35% bonds, 55% stocks. But it's a reasonable balance. And critically, you went from 30% cash to 12.5% cash. That 17.5% difference on $800K is $140,000 that's now working for you instead of losing to inflation. Over 20 years, that $140,000 invested at 7% becomes $541,000. The same $140,000 in cash at 1% becomes $171,000. You just found $370,000 for your 85-year-old self. That's what fixing excessive cash does. Here's what this comes down to. After 60, cash is not safety. Cash is risk. The risk of inflation eroding your purchasing power, the risk of running out of money at 82, the risk of calling your kids for money at 78. Real safety after 60 is having a portfolio that can last 20, some 30 years while maintaining your standard of living. That portfolio needs growth. Growth requires taking some market risk. Market risk feels scary, but inflation risk is certain destruction. Most people have this backward. They're terrified of market volatility they can see. They're comfortable with inflation erosion they can't see. But the inflation will destroy them just as surely, just more slowly and invisibly. You're 65 with $700,000 and 25 years ahead of you. Every decision you make now compounds forward through those 25 years. Hold too much cash, and you're choosing slow impoverishment. Invest appropriately, and you give yourself a chance at comfortable longevity. The people who make it to 90 with money aren't the ones who played it safe with cash. They're the ones who understood that at 60 plus, inflation is the real enemy. And you fight inflation with assets that grow, not with cash that dies slowly. Your 60s aren't about preservation through cash. They're about strategic growth through proper asset allocation. The cash you're holding for safety is the anchor drowning your retirement. Cut it loose, invest appropriately. Give your 80-year-old self the resources they'll desperately need. The math doesn't care about your fear, but your future absolutely depends on whether you face the math today or ignore it until it's too late. Don't hold cash after 60. Hold enough for true liquidity and emergencies. Then invest the rest in assets that actually fight inflation and grow. That's not risky. That's the only strategy that actually works over 25, 30-year retirements. Your 60s determine your 80s. Choose accordingly. Now, if you want more brutal honesty about building wealth and achieving financial independence, more timeless principles that actually work instead of get-rich-quick garbage, subscribe to this channel. I don't promise easy. I don't promise fast. I promise truth.